So I was perusing, I don't know if it was Twitter or Facebook, but I came across this study, and it's actually not a study, it's a write up about studies. And you see this all the time on social media or just the news. Um, the study, though, is called Ants Are Immune to Traffic Jams. And I was like, oh my goodness, we're studying and looking at and reading about ants in my class. So I took a look at it, and it looked really fascinating. Here's kind of a subtitle. It says, unlike self-interested humans, ants have a common goal: the colony's survival. Now, what are traffic jams? So I know all about traffic jams. You guys still have a little ways to go, but even if so, a traffic jam could be a metaphor. Even traffic doesn't have to be cars and trucks and stuff. uh, when it comes to people, like I think of all of us going to an assembly when we're not experiencing the pandemic and we're going into the multi-purpose room. What happens when too many if all the classes were dismissed at the same time? What would happen going into the multi-purpose room? Well, we would all bunch up and it would get really crowded. People may even start like kind of pushing or shoving a little bit. Ants don't do that. Here's an image showing black ants marching along the stem of a leaf. Unlike humans, ants don't experience traffic jams, even at high densities. Density would be like a lot of ants all in the same place, okay? And then this is a really nice write-up all about different scientific papers that explain like where they got this idea. Like why do scientists not think that ants do this? Ants are notoriously much better than humans at organizing their collective traffic flow when foraging for food. But how they manage to do so isn't fully understood. Even in dense, crowded conditions, ant colonies still manage to maintain a smooth and efficient traffic flow, primarily by adjusting their behavior to adapt to changing circumstances, according to a new paper in the journal eLife. Ants are a textbook. Now, I continued reading, and it was really fascinating and interesting, the information that they give about ants. But some of these are links, and some of these links will bring you to where. And look, this article talks about the paper about ant traffic. Okay, and here it shows some images from the paper, and that's it. So look, here's an address where you could go to the paper, but the paper is actually linked earlier in the article. And this article is just for sharing on social media, or for educating yourself. But if you want to find out the source, where the people who wrote this article got their information about ants and ant traffic, you can go back here to the top and click on this, a new paper. And if you do, you'll come to this paper that I took a look at, and I want to share with you, because this is an actual look, it's really long, an actual science article published in a real science journal called eLife. Okay, now the title of this is a little different from the title of the article that talks about this study. Experimental investigation of ant traffic under crowded conditions. So here you have a science experiment that isn't just putting a block in the trail of ants. It's actually doing several different experiments in order to see why, and observe, why do ants not experience the same kind of traffic problems that humans do? They don't have police officers that control traffic, or do they? Maybe ants do have, the way they have worker ants and queen ants and different jobs within the colony. Maybe they have traffic control. So scientists ask these questions, and then they observe and they look at and do experiments with ants in order to find out valuable information that other scientists who study ants and other animal behaviors can learn. I want to point out a few things about this paper that are different from the article that you're going to be looking at. Now, this is not written with a third grade audience in mind. This is written for scientists, by scientists. So this is what a typical science paper would look like. I'm not going to read very much of it. In fact, I don't understand a lot of it. But I just want to point out a few attributes or characteristics of this paper just to show you what science looks like when it's published. Here you have, now this is online, so it's not the same as a paper copy that you would get in a paper journal, but this is how things are done nowadays. Most things are done online. One interesting characteristic of the online version is it says right here how much it's been cited, how many times it's been read. Annotations would be like how many times it was changed or comments were left on the article. And this is relatively new. It's about a year since it's been published, and there are newer studies too. At the very beginning here you have the authors, and I want to point this out for a reason. I won't even try to pronounce their names, but I will show you that under the names of the authors it says where they're from. Toulouse University in France, Arizona State University in the United States, the University of Adelaide, Australia. First of all, they're all universities, right? But secondly, they're from all over the world, and they collaborated together, the scientists from these universities, in order to learn about ants and study ants and put together this paper, which is really fascinating. And here at the beginning of the paper, you have what's called an abstract. This is taking the information, it's like making a little summary, but it's tiny, and usually it's just a paragraph, and it kind of gives you, it's like a commercial for the paper. They give you the basics of what this paper is all about. Efficient transportation is crucial for urban mobility, cell function, and the survival of animal groups. I won't even read past that. But I'll tell you that they're just making a case for why this paper is important, right? Urban would be high density areas, and it doesn't just mean in the city of people. Urban mobility could mean like any densely populated place. Cell function is like the building blocks of living organisms. So our skin cells, any cell in your body, blood cells, plant cells. So they're just making a case for why this is important. And here you have, this is like the introduction. Oh no, it's not even the introduction. So again, this is a little atypical, which means not the norm. Usually I would just jump right into the introduction, but here I think they give kind of like an even more like for the general, for kind of making a case for why study this kind of thing. And it's like an introduction to the introduction. Humans and ants are among the few species that engage in two-way traffic. Maintaining a smooth and efficient traffic flow while avoiding collisions is challenging for humans. Yet, ants seem to be masters of traffic management. They can efficiently move back and forth between their nests and food without overtaking or passing each other. Usually you wouldn't see something like this, because whoever is going to look at this paper and read this paper, typically a science paper, they already know what's up. So usually scientists jump right into it like this. And you could see these underlined names and dates. These are what's called sources. So whenever you publish a science paper like this, you have to say where you got your information from. And in the introduction, these authors are writing all about ants and how they migrate, how they forage, and they have to have sources that back up the information that they're sharing. And here is information from other sources and here you see where the authors got the information. But check out these pictures. It shows how ants typically would flow, how fast they would flow. And here's like probably a previous experiment that was done with ants. I'm skipping ahead, and I'm not going to read much of this paper, and I don't want to show too much of it. You can find it online. I didn't have to pay to read it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you have to subscribe to the journal. But the whole idea of these science experiments is to share the information that scientists find and learn about with other scientists. Why? In order to build and encourage and grow the knowledge about a topic. So, scientists that are studying ants are going to want to read this. And what happens when they read this? Well, then they cite, just like the authors of this paper cited all of these different studies. Look, from 1935 and 1953. So this is the year 1935. Usually they wouldn't use such old papers, but if something is like an important paper that was like a landmark study, then they might use it because it's so valuable and everyone references it. But other scientists are going to use this study, just like that article that I pointed out at the beginning of this video. It looked at this study, but scientists will use the information from this in order to conduct future experiments. Here you can see some really interesting graphic aids that show what the scientists who wrote this paper came across, right? And there's even some videos so you can see how the ants behaved. In our little article, it mentioned that a digital camera was optional and you could use one. But if you take a look at this, you can see what they're talking about in their paper. And look, it looks a little bit more dense here even, but there's definitely a constant flow from one side to the other, and you could definitely see the two-way traffic. It's amazing that the ants can get by each other. So that's what they were studying, and they use all these graphs and different graphic aids in order to show that. And there's a couple other things I just want to point out. Here's a discussion which will talk about the results, like how they can interpret the results. And then there are, oh look, here's materials and methods. Methods would be like the process of the experiment. And there's usually a conclusion. Sometimes it's labeled conclusion, sometimes it's labeled something else. I'm not seeing it, but if you read the paper carefully, you would come across what the authors deduce from all of their learning and their observations. Now here's something I want to show you. This is a list of references, which are sources that were used to write this paper. Any information that the authors of this paper used in their paper, it has to be connected to a source, and those sources are listed right here. And you can see the names of the other paper. These are all scientific papers. They're not going to be like, just magazine articles or textbooks. These are going to be legit papers written about experiments and observations about ants. You can see there's quite a few. Sometimes there's 80 or even 100 resources or references for a science paper like this. This particular article was really wild because at the very end they actually share, this journal, eLife, shares the letters that were involved in accepting this paper to their journal, which I have never seen before, but it's pretty interesting. It actually, they talk about them doing this in order to be transparent, which means like share all the information. Like they didn't have a personal interest in this article. They want to show like what went into the article. And one of the main things that goes into articles is what's called peer review. And here they talk about who reviewed. So a board of reviewing editors took a look at the paper and decided. And who are those peers that reviewed the paper? Well, they actually had the names of them and who they are and why those people were chosen. And then later on they talk about what revisions. Remember me talking about revising your writing all the time? Well, you have to do that right up through being an actual scientist. And these are some revisions. The journal showed what the peer reviewers wanted as revisions and the actual revisions that were made to the article before it was published.
As you can see, it's a lot of work to put together a paper, a research paper, to be published in a science journal. these scientists put together, or they did a lot of research where they looked at sources that had information about ants and the ant traffic and how ants communicate. And in order to learn about ants, they used that information to write their paper and help other scientists understand where they got their information in their starting point. And then they actually talk about the experiment that they did. They talk about the materials, they talk about the process that they used in order to study ants themselves, and then they talked about the information that they learned from their experiment that would have gone into their discussion. Usually it's labeled conclusion. And why is this science paper published in the first place? Well, it's in order to share the information with other scientists who study ants. Because science is all about building the information, learning more and more and more and more, and continuing to grow our knowledge about species, topics, scientific topics, and helping people develop better and better experiments in order to learn more and more and more and more. And that's science for you. So I hope you learned something from this little video about a scientific paper, a real one that you can find online. I'll provide a link to the paper and the article where I originally found the paper in the description of this video. Take care and science on.